So this next section is going to get into perhaps one of my favorite features found within Microsoft Excel. We're going to discuss pivot tables. Now, before we jump in and start to get our hands dirty and start to develop pivot tables within Excel, I want to talk about what is a pivot table. What is the purpose? Really just get an understanding, and I'll make this quick, an understanding of pivot tables themselves and why I think they are such a cool and effective tool within Excel. Take a look. Open in front of you, I've got our standard exercise file, which once again is a part of lecture number 2. Download it, open it up, you can follow along with me. Now, I'm on a worksheet, it's the last one in the workbook, called Sales Data. And it's a simple little list. It's got some headers along the top, year, month, type, salesperson, and so on, and rows of records down below. We got just over 400 records in this list. Now, something very common that you're going to want to do with a list like this is summarize it. Because right now, this list is details. It's showing me details of each sale that's taken place. They're telling you what year, what the month was, what the type was, what actually got sold, who sold it, what region was it in, what was the amount, and so on. You got details, 400 plus detailed records of all the sales. Now, what I want to do is take the details and summarize it. I want to get something from here, this list on the left, to something like this over here on the right. I want to get a breakdown of the different months that we've made sales in, the different salespeople who sold during those months, and what did they sell? How much did they sell? This right here, this is a pivot table. It's just based off this data over here. So through a simple click and drag operation that we're about to walk through here throughout this section, you're going to see how to take this detailed set of records and summarize it down to something that looks like this here. A simple little spreadsheet. Now, a pivot table, when you start creating one, has 4 different sections that you can put content into. It's got row labels, that's one. In this case, I put months into it. This is just the months for my list. It's got column labels. In my case, I grabbed the salesperson. It's got the data or the value where they're going to calculate cross sections. Hey, for the month of January, Bishop sold this much. And this is where I grab sales from. And it's got a fourth spot. If I click into here, it's got a section called filters, which I'm not currently using. Okay, but you can also filter within a pivot table using the filter section. So this is really big picture here, but the idea is to go from detailed list down to a summarized little spreadsheet. Something with row labels, column labels, and values, and with an optional filter included inside of the pivot table. So we're going to try this out. We're going to go step by step through creating a pivot table and get into some other features of developing additional options within your pivot table. All right, so first step of creating a pivot table is we need to create one. So open in front of you, I've got the example file, Excel 102 exercises, and I'm on the sales data worksheet. Got a simple little list here. A few columns and notes, kind of commit these to memory. Got year, month, type, salesperson, and so on. And a few rows of records, about just over 400 records worth of detailed line items about sales. The year took place, the month, the type, salesperson, region, and so on. So now I want to summarize this. Stop and think about that for just a moment. What would you like to summarize about this list? Do I want to get total sales by month, by year? Do I want to get total sales by type and who sold it, who is a salesperson? Do I want to break out total sales by region? Or maybe I don't even want total sales. Maybe I want to get total units for different types, different products that we've sold. Whatever it is, you're going to create a pivot table to create this summarized set of data. Take a look. This is how you create a pivot table. So I'm first going to click into my list. Doesn't matter where, just as long as you're in the list. That's step 1. Step 2, I'm going to go up to the Insert tab. On the Insert tab, you have a section called Tables. My very first option there is Pivot Table. I'll give that a click. Wants to know a little bit of information, wants to know where my data is at. Now, because I already clicked into my list, it should already have it there. A4 to H448. If it's wrong, you can go out there and select it yourself. Okay? But remember, just click into your list, then go to Insert Pivot Table, and it should grab it for you. Next thing it wants to know is, well, where do you want to build the pivot table? For our exercise here, I'm going to put it into a new worksheet. So it's going to create a new tab down below for me. I could put it into an existing one, but once again, for my exercise, we'll do a new one. I'm going to hit OK. And I've now created a new tab. There it is, sheet 1. I'm going to give it a double click just to rename it. I'll call it pivot table. There we go. And the data that this is based off of is right next door, sales data. There's my old list. Back to pivot table. So I've now created the beginnings of my pivot table. And I do want to point out that if I'm clicked into the placeholder over here on the left, that I get 3 things. I get a new tab with an Analyze and Design tab, some options for me to work with my pivot table, and I get my pivot table fields where I'll start creating my pivot table. If I click out someplace else inside the Excel document, then those tabs go away and the panel on the right go away. But if I click back into it, I'll get those features back again. Something small, but at some point you might accidentally do that and be like, where did it go? Well, no big deal. Just click back into the pivot table area and you'll get that stuff back. All right. So now I'm going to start building the actual pivot table. So now over here on the right-hand side of my screen, I've got a list of my fields. Remember the year, month, type, salesperson, region, sales, and so on? These are the same headers that come from my list. So inside of there, I'm going to start dragging these. It's a simple click and drag process to create a pivot table. I'm just going to drag them into one of 4 areas down below to start building this little summarized spreadsheet based on that list of 400 plus records. So I want to do, I'm going to grab salesperson, left click, and drag it down to the row section. As soon as I let go, right away, Excel is starting to build my pivot table. And it's already summarized. It's got my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 unique salespeople. Well, now, what do I want to know about those salespeople? Well, maybe I want to know their total sales. So I'm going to go grab sales, drag that down to the value section. And through just a couple of click and drags, I now have a total sales report by salesperson. Oh, you know what? Salesperson, I don't want salesperson. I'm going to grab that one and drag it back up. You know what? Oh, there's a grand total of sales. That's nice. But you know what? I want to know type. How much did we sell of each type of product? So I'll grab type and drag that down to rows. And now I've got a total sales report for different types. It's that simple. And this is one of the reasons why I love pivot tables so much, because they're simple to create. Click and drag. It does the work for you. In my opinion, pivot tables themselves aren't very difficult. Not at all. Just click and drag. The most difficult part about pivot tables is deciding what it is that you want to report off of. How do you want to lay it out? But once you know that, just click and drag. Create the pivot table. Let's try a little more here. So now I've got type, total sales for type. I want to break this up by month. So I'm going to go grab month, and I'll drag that down to the column section. And now I've got products broken up by month and total sales. Very quick. I mean, through just a couple of clicks and drags, I've got this very dynamic report called a pivot table. So try this out. Jump into the exercise file, go over to the sales data worksheets, the last one in the workbook, click into that list, go to your Insert tab, top of your screen, go to Pivot Table. Put it in a new sheet. Now, click and drag, just move your fields into one of the 3 sections that we've talked about so far to start building the summarized report based off of the sales data worksheet. So we've started creating a pivot table. Now, there's some defaults that take place as you're clicking and dragging to set up the summarized pivot table. Take a look. Now, I've still got the example file open here, and I've got the pivot table that I left off with in the previous lecture. Now, think about this for a moment. When I grabbed sales, I dragged that down into the value section. Now, when I dragged it down into the value section, what did Excel do with that sales value? What did it do? What type of calculation did it perform? Yeah, if you look closely there, I can see it's a sum of sales. It says it right there. So default, when I dragged that sales down there, Excel was like, hey, that's a number. I'm going to go ahead and sum that. That was just its default behavior. But take a look at this. What if I grab sum of sales and drag that back out? I don't want it. And let's get rid of that. But you know what? Now I've got the products in different months. I'd like to know, how many. I want to get a count. How many of these products did we sell for each month? Well, how am I going to get that? I'm going to try this. I'm going to grab type, which is the frozen yogurt, ice cream, popsicles, tasty treats. I'll grab that. And I'm going to drag it into the value section. Now, this is a number, so it's not summing it. It can't sum it because it's not a number, so it's just counting it. This is default behavior. Excel sees a number, default it sums it. Excel sees text, default it'll count it. So now I can see that, and this is super slick, frozen yogurt sold 18 for the month of January, ice cream was 24, and so on. I'm getting a simple count of the different products broken up for each month. Now remember, these are just default behaviors. All I did was just click and drag and drop these down there, and Excel was like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do if you got text. This is what I'm going to do if you got numbers. I'm going to sum it or I'm going to count it. Well, you know what? I want to move beyond those defaults. So let me clean this up a little bit. I'm going to get rid of the count of type. Just drag that back up. I'm going to get rid of month. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take month and put it into rows. I'm going to get rid of type. Let's get rid of that. So now I've just got my months there. All right. What do I want to know about the months? Well, maybe I want to know the total sales. So no problem. I'll grab sales. I'll drag that down there. Ding. I've now got a sum of sales. Remember, default behavior. It's numeric. It sums it. Well, I don't want a sum. I want to get an average sale for the month. Okay, so I'm going to come down here where it says sum of sales. I'll give that a left click. I get a little flyout menu here. And the first option, actually bottom option here, is value field settings. I'll give that a click. This is going to open up my value field settings window. And I'm going to change this from sum to average. And just note that there's several different aggregate or summarizing type values or functions that you can use here. I'll do an average. And now I've got a new column there called average of sales. Maybe I'll just call it sales average. You can rename it here if you like. I'll hit OK. And I've now got an average sale. And all I did there was just drag sales down below, give it a click, go into value field settings, and change it. Let's try another one. You know what? I want to keep the average, but I'm going to grab sales a second time and drag it down there. So no big surprise. Hey, I've got sum of sales again. All right, great. That's default, remember? But I want to change that. How do we change it? Well, we go back to where I got sum of sales. I'll give that a left click. I'm going to go back into value field settings. And let's say, I've got some other summarizing functions I can use here. But I've also got this additional tab called Show Values As. All right, let's give that a click. Here's what I want to do this time. I don't want a sum. I don't want an average. I don't want a maximum, minimum, and a count or whatever. I want to get a month over month. I want to know the difference. Did we increase between January and February or between March and February? I want to get a month difference calculation here. Take a look. So underneath Show Values As, I'm going to change it from no calculation. I'm going to change it to, I'm going to do a difference from. Let's do percent, actually. Let's do percent difference from. So percent difference from, and we're going to say our base field is going to be our months. And I'm going to compare each month to the previous month. So take the base field of month, such as February, and compare it against the base item, which is the previous. So February against January, March against February, April against March, and so on. I'll hit OK. And I've now got a percent difference month over month. So between February and January, we were up 4%. Between April and March, these 2 months, we went up quite a bit. Between March and February, we went down considerable amount there. So another simple change. Drop the field into the value section, give it a click. left click, go into value field settings. You can use just the standard summarizing calculations, or you can hop up to show values as and get into some more robust operations. I want to get a percentages of the grand total. I want to do a difference from. I want to do a running total. You got several operations that you can arrange here within your pivot table calculations. So try this out. You get the defaults. Text, summing. Text, you're going to count it. Numbers, you're going to sum. And beyond that, you can do some other complex calculations here, all through the value field settings window. Let's take a look at another feature within Microsoft Excel pivot tables. We're going to take a look at grouping data within a pivot table. Now, we've really already done some grouping. When I took the month column and dropped it into rows, it essentially took the records from the sales data worksheet and grouped all the January records together, all the February records together, and so on. And it allowed me to be able to summarize data within those groups, because we had multiple sales during January, multiple sales during February, but we're just seeing summarized, grouped sum of sales right here. So in an essence, we have done some grouping. It's really summarizing data. Now, I want to move beyond just the standard group that just happens through click and drag into a group that we establish perhaps inside of this pivot table right here. For example, I've got months, and months can be grouped in many different ways. I could group them individually, so we just got January with all of its sales, February with all of its sales, or maybe I can group this by quarter. I could group it by year, just put them all together. I could group these because chronologically it makes sense. Group them in these different fashions. Well, I'm going to try quarters here. I want to be able to take January, February, March and put those into a quarter. And then I want to take April, May. We don't have all the quarters here, but I'm going to take April, May, put them into their own, and I'll put November, December into its own. Okay, so we'll have 3 different sort of quarters within this group listing that we're about to create here. Creating groups inside your pivot tables, really simple to do. And this is another reason why I love pivot tables. They're click and drag, really easy to create, and all the little features in here, just once you know they're available to you, they're really easy to activate. Let's take a look. First step, I'm going to select January, February, and March. Get my 3 months there for my first quarter. With those 3 selected, I'm going to go up to my pivot table tools section. And in here you got an Analyze tab and you've got a Design tab where you can find all sorts of features. On the Analyze tab, towards the left, and about a third of the way into the Analyze tab, we've got a Group section. And I'm just going to go say Group Selection. And I've now grouped those 3 months. January, February, March. But you know what? It actually grouped all of them. It put these 3 months that I had selected into its own group. And if I just click up here, I can rename it. We'll just say this is QTR1. There's quarter 1. Yeah, I got a group. And I can hit the minus sign there to collapse it up. And I just got a grand total for that group, quarter 1. Hit the plus sign to expand it back out and get the details. But you know what? By default, it went into there and it grouped the other ones just kind of independently of each other. Which really isn't what I wanted, but this works for now. So my next step is I'm now going to grab April and May. Let's actually grab all of that right there. And I'm going to group that. So with those selected, I'll go back to Analyze, and I'm going to group the selection. All right, there's my group 2, and I'll rename that one. This will be quarter 2, quarter 2, and so on. Oh, make sure I'm actually typing inside there. Let's try that once again. QTR2, enter. There we go. And now I'm going to do the last one here. This will actually be, quarter 4. So I'll get November, December there, Analyze. I'm going to group that selection, and I'm going to rename it here. So this is QTR4. And there we have it. Really simple to create the groups. Just highlight what you want to group, go up to your Analyze tab, create the group by its selection. Now remember, you established the one, and all the other ones just uniquely get grouped into their own little settings. So now it's just up to you to go through, make the selections, and group it. Make the selections and group it. And don't forget to go back in there and rename these groups that really fit your needs. So try this out. Slap together a pivot table, whether it's based on months or different types of products. Maybe you're going to put products into different categories or different regions into larger picture regions. Whatever it might be, make those selections, group them, give them a name. The next thing I want to take a look at in regards to a pivot table is formatting the pivot table. And you do have a number of different ways that you can get into formatting the results of a pivot table. I'm going to take you through first kind of the more manual process where you can get into the nitty-gritty and really start to format the pivot table to your liking. And then we'll take a look at some styles that you can use to help format your pivot table. Just some kind of canned, pre-formatted results of pivot tables. So first, even though I say that this is kind of a more manual process, again, pivot tables, they're pretty straightforward. You just got to know where the feature's at, and just through a couple of clicks of the mouse, you're done. Watch this. So I've got months in my row labels, and I've got a sum of sales inside my value section. Now, these are sales amounts. These are numbers, so they should look like currency. I should have commas and decimal places and the currency symbol for whatever country we're living in and so on. So I want to format that as a currency. Well, you got a couple ways to do this. What I'm going to recommend is to go into your pivot table fields panel, go down to your value section where you got sum of sales, give that a click, just a left click. I'm going to go back into value field settings that we talked about earlier with custom calculations. Give that a click. Inside of the value field settings window, lower left corner, I'm going to go to number format. I'll give that a click. This is going to open up the format window that you're probably familiar with by using just Excel in general. Inside of here, you got all your different formats. I'm going to go to currency, and I'll just leave it set to the default one there. I'm going to use the dollar symbol, and my negative formats will just be a negative symbol. That's fine. I'll hit OK, and I'm going to hit OK again. And I've now formatted the results of the sum of sales. That easy. Go down to your value section, give it a click, go into value field settings, get into number format, format your numbers, whatever those numbers are and however you want to represent them. So that's me manually jumping in there and doing a little bit of format. Now we've also got the ability to get into what are called styles, some canned formatting. Take a look. I'll click into my pivot table, go up to my design tab, top of my screen. On the design tab, you've got pivot table styles. And in here, this is much like format as table that we saw a few lectures ago. You got all these canned formatting options that you can pick from. And let's see, once again, I like blue. I'm going to grab this one right here. I'll hit OK, or I'll just select it. And I've now formatted my pivot table. It's got some blue colors. My headers are bold now. Let me click back into there again. I'm going to add some more here. I'm going to grab salesperson and put that in the column section. And you can see I've got this nice formatted pivot table. Let's try another one. I like orange as well. There's an orange one, just kind of some borders around it. Let's see, I can turn on banded rows. So now I've got every other row there that's formatted, or maybe I'll do, not banded rows, I'll do banded columns. And I got every other column formatted. But you got all these canned styles. I like that one right there. That's a nice one. Again, I like blue. Nice big headers there at the top, bold calculations down below. I got my dollar symbols in there, decimal places, thousands, commas, but a nice formatted pivot table. And again, really simple to do. You can go down into the value section, get into the value field settings where you can do your number formatting. You want to get into colors and such, you can hop up to the design tab, and you've got a bunch of styles to pick from to start formatting your pivot tables. So try this out. Whatever you pick, design a pivot table, slap in some fields in there, and then get in and format the numbers through the value field settings. Get up to the design tab and grab some styles that you can use to really start to push these over the edge and make them more presentable. So the next feature that I want to introduce you to here in regards to a pivot table is kind of doing the reverse of what a pivot table is all about. Now remember, when we first started creating a pivot table, we started out with this sales data worksheet. And it was detailed records, right? We knew the year, the month, the type, the salesperson, 400 plus records of detailed information. Now, we built a pivot table based off this data so that we could summarize it. I want to move away from details because I now want to create a report that I can look at and maybe compare salespeople against one another with total sales or months. Did we increase in revenue or decrease month over month? I want to get summarized information that I wouldn't normally get out of just raw, detailed data, or at least not very accessible to get to that point. Well, now that I've got a pivot table and I've summarized it and I can get to those really quick, intelligent business decisions based on this summarized data, there's going to be occasion where you now want to drill into the summarized data to see the details. For example, looking at this set of data right here, I'm looking at April for Parker. That holy moly, Parker blew everybody away, right? $300,000. The next closest person to him is $108,000 worth of sales. Or his next month, Next month is there. If I'm looking at April, the next person there is 142, so roughly half as much as Parker for the month of April. How did Parker get to that number? So I want to see the details behind that $301,977 sales amount right there. Well, this is another very simple feature. This is called drill down. I'm going to drill down into the details of that number. And the way that you do this is by double clicking. I'm going to double click on Parker's amount there for April. Double click, just left double click. This creates a whole new sheet and I've got all the details of that number right there. I can see this is the month of April for Parker and I can see everything that Parker sold, the sales amounts and so on. All right there in one spot. Drill down into that data. I can go back to my pivot table sheet. Still got my data right there. I'm looking at here's December for Bishop, 157,000. I give that a double click and I'm right into Bishop's data. Drill down into the details of that summarized number. Really easy to do, not much more than that, but a very effective, accessible way to get back to the details. If you didn't have this feature, I get back to pivot tables and I think, what? Parker, whoa, what's going on there? So I'd have to go back to the sales data sheet and perhaps I'd have to filter for Parker and filter for April and, I'd modify the original lists. Well, I don't have to do that. Really accessible. Just double click on any cross section within your pivot table and you've got the detailed drill down into your data right there. So we've got a pivot table. We've been able to summarize a large set of data, right, coming from this sales data worksheet, 400 plus records, maybe it's thousands of records, whatever it is, some large amount of data, and we've summarized it down to rows, row labels, column labels, and something to calculate in the cross sections. Now that we've got a summarized little spreadsheet happening here, I now want to look at this in something more visual. I want to see a chart based on this data. Now, included inside of a pivot table, you have a feature called a pivot chart. These are very similar to your standard Excel charts with one big difference. Take a look. This is how you create a pivot chart based off of a pivot table. Again, the idea is I want something more visual. So, first step, I'll click into my pivot table. Doesn't matter where, just as long as I'm in that pivot table. I'm going to go up to the top where I got my two new tabs, Analyze and Design. I'll go to my Analyze tab, and towards the far right, you got a section called Tools. And one of the tools is a pivot chart. I'll give that a click. I'm going to get to pick the type of pivot chart that I want. And if you've created standard types of charts inside of Excel, these are going to look exactly the same. If you haven't dealt with charts before inside of Excel, I recommend go back to my 101 course. You can find it here on Udemy. And you can sign up for that one and learn all about charts there. But here we've got a pivot chart. So I'm going to stick with the default, just the clustered column chart, probably one of the more typical common types of charts that people work with. I'll have that one selected. I'm going to hit OK. And I've now got a chart based on my pivot table. I'll move that one down. There it is. Really simple. Click into your pivot table, hop up to your Analyze tab, top of your screen, pivot chart, pick your type of chart, and you're good to go. You've got a chart. Now, there's one big difference between a pivot chart and your standard Excel charts, just your default charts that you find on your Insert tab within Excel. Well, the pivot chart is still connected to the pivot table, which means anything that changes structure-wise in the pivot table changes within the chart as well. Take a look. So I decide, you know what? I don't want month anymore. So I drag that out. Boop, gone. So now I've just got total sales for salespeople. And if I go down here to my chart, look at that. I've got total sales for my salespeople. Ooh, you know what? I want to put the year down below. So I'll grab year, put that inside of my axis category. And now I've got years down here, broken up by sales by salesperson. And if I go back up here, look at that. I've got my years. Ooh, you know what? I don't want year. Let's drag that out of there. Let's do this by type, the different products. So now I've got my products, my salespeople, their total sales, and I've got it down here as well. So very dynamic. They're hooked up to one another. It doesn't matter how your pivot table changes, it will update, and vice versa. You change the chart, it updates the pivot table. Click and drag. They're connected. They stay connected. Doesn't matter about changing the size of the data. You don't have to go back in and change the data source for the chart. They're just connected. It's one of the beauties. Again, super simple. Create these very dynamic, very robust reports just by clicking and dragging. Not much more than that. Now, anything that you know about standard types of charts inside of Excel, apply here as well. So if you want to format them, if you want to add additional data points or data elements to your chart, that's all done exactly the same way you'd work with standard types of charts inside of Excel. So, try this out. Create a pivot table. Click into that pivot table, go up to your Analyze tab, and create a chart. Try out a cluster column chart. Try out a pie chart, whatever you want. Try messing around with the layout of your pivot table and confirm that your chart updates as well. So once again, we've got a pivot table created. We've summarized data. All of this data is based on the sales data worksheet, those 400 plus records. Now that we've got a pivot table and we're summarizing all that data, there's going to come times when I don't want to see all the data. I just want to see specific records being summarized here. Well, within Excel pivot tables, we have a few different ways to filter the results of a pivot table. Take a look. I'm going to show off two of the options right here during this lecture, and then in the next lecture, I'm going to show off a relatively newer tool that was introduced in the 2010 edition and carried forward into the later releases. So take a look. This is how you filter a pivot table. 1. If I click into my pivot table, I can see that I've got my row labels and column labels. Row labels being the different products, the types, column labels being, in my case, the salespeople. Now, right next door to the column labels and row labels, I've got some drop-down arrows. And if I give that a click, I can jump into here just like you do a regular filter inside of a regular old Excel list, and I could do things like, you know what? I just want to see frozen yogurt and popsicles. I'll grab those two, I'll hit OK, and that's all I'll get. Simple little filter. And look at that, my chart updated as well. I've now just got frozen yogurt and popsicles. Very nice. You know what? I don't want to see all the salespeople. So same thing, I could jump into here and say, I just want to see Bishop and Lee. That's it. Then I've now filtered the results of my pivot table just through the column and row labels. And once again, my chart is updated. Now this is one method. Okay, so if you're familiar with running filters like we did back in an earlier section of this lecture, it's very similar here inside of your pivot tables. Now you do have another option. Row labels and column labels, those are both parts of my pivot table right now. Well, pivot tables also have a filter section. Let's say I grab the month. I'll grab month, drag that down into filters, and now my pivot table has an additional element where I can now filter by the month. So you know what? I just want to see April. That's it. I'll select April, I'll hit OK, and now I've just got the April numbers here. And once again, my chart is updated. Jump back up there, I want to see March. And there's my March day. Ooh, got nothing for March. So those two people, whoever they were, we didn't sell anything during March. So let's get back up there and I'll say, let's do January. Then I've got some data for Bishop and Lee for frozen yogurt. Ding! Really simple to do. Nice little filters. You got the little drop downs you can get to, or you can get into the filter section of the pivot table and filter through here as well. Whatever operation. Both very similar in technique, just little drop downs. Again, very similar to the auto filter inside of Excel. You're just filtering the results of your pivot table. So once again, Try this out. Build yourself a quick little pivot table. Use the one from the previous lecture, whatever it is. Apply your filters. Search for those specific records. Drop down arrows. Select what you're looking for, whether it's product or salesperson or different months, whatever it is. So we just got done talking about filtering within a pivot table. And I'm going to go ahead and clear my filters for a moment. I'll go back to my row labels here, the little drop down, and I'm going to clear the filter. That's off of the type, and I'm going to do the same thing for my salespeople. And I'll go up here to my month, and I'm going to clear those out as well. I'll just go back to all. Now, again, a very accessible way to filter the pivot tables, little drop down arrows, just like you filter anything else inside of Excel. Well, you know what? This is great, but we do need to know a little bit about a filter command within Excel to perform these operations. I want to make this even more accessible so that anybody that comes into my Excel pivot table can jump right in there, doesn't have to know anything about filtering inside of Excel, and they can perform a filter on my pivot table. When the 2010 edition of Excel was released, Microsoft developed a tool called the Slicer. And the Slicer is a more robust and more accessible interface to filtering the results of your pivot table. Take a look. This is how you create and work with a pivot table slicer. So first step, I'm going to click into my pivot table. Doesn't matter where. I'm going to go up to my Analyze tab, top of my screen. About halfway through, you got a section called Filter. And I'm going to insert a slicer. So first step here, as I insert a slicer, I now get to pick how do I want to slice or how do I want to filter my pivot table. Well, you know what? I've got product and salesperson out there already. I got month. Let's grab the region. I'll select region. I'm going to hit OK. And this is my slicer. It's a kind of a dashboard element. A nice accessible little interface here where all I need to do is click on one of the values like north and it filters my pivot table. I'll grab west. Got Bishop in the west who sold these. I got central. Ooh, Lee and Watson are part of the central region. I'll hold down my control key and select south. So now I got south and central all together, just control click, and it got it all right there. But a nice accessible user interface to be able to interact with this table and quickly filter the results. This is your slicer tool. And again, all you need to do, click into the pivot table, go to the Analyze tab, and insert a slicer. Grab one of your columns, like this time maybe I'll grab the year. I'll hit OK. Now I've got two slicers, year and the region. And I can resize these guys. Let's make them a little bit smaller, but perhaps I want to stack them on top of one another. And I'll select 2014. There's my data. I'll grab West. Let's grab 2013. So now I've got two little slicers here where I can interactively and very accessibly access the filtering portion of our pivot tables. Let's try this one out. Create that more accessible environment for anybody that comes into your reports now. A quick little slicer. Click into your pivot table, hop up to the Analyze tab, insert a slicer, and now you can have this nice little interface to be able to filter your pivot table.